Papyrus Oxyrhynchus 4365, Fragment 1, Recto. 6 lines of Greek text in a semi-cursive hand, dated paleographically to the late 1st or early 2nd century of the Common Era. The fragment was excavated from the rubbish heaps of Oxyrhynchus, Egypt during the 1998 season and is now housed in the Ashmolean Museum at Oxford. The text is a military document, a report or letter from a Roman soldier stationed in the eastern provinces. Line 3 contains the phrase execution detail, Jerusalem district, Passover season. Line 4 mentions 3 condemned, sedition charges, crucified outside city wall. Line 5 is damaged, but includes the word Centurion, followed by what appears to be a personal observation or comment, now illegible due to water damage and insect activity. The fragment breaks off mid-sentence. The remainder of the document, if it was ever deposited in the Oxyrhynchus waste stream, has not been recovered. The discovery was published in the Oxyrhynchus Papyri Volume 69 in 2005. The editors noted the historical interest of the fragment but made no specific connection to the crucifixion narratives in the Christian Gospels. The dating is consistent. Passover season, Jerusalem, sedition charges, multiple crucifixions. The Roman occupation of Judea employed crucifixion as a standard deterrent for insurrection, banditry, and political defiance. Josephus records that during the siege of Jerusalem in 70 of the Common Era, the Romans crucified so many rebels that there was no room left for the crosses and no crosses left for the bodies. The fragment from Oxyrhynchus describes a routine event in the administration of Roman provincial justice, but the centurion's comment, whatever it was considered worth recording, and that fact alone makes the fragment unusual. The Gospel accounts provide names and details, but no official records. Mark 15, verse 39. And when the centurion who stood facing him saw that in this way he breathed his last, he said, "Truly, this man was the Son of God." Matthew 27, verse 54. When the centurion and those who were with him, keeping watch over Jesus, saw the earthquake and what took place, they were filled with awe and said, "Truly, this was the Son of God." Luke 23, verse 47. Now when the centurion saw what had taken place, he praised God, saying, "Certainly this man was innocent." The accounts differ in detail. Mark emphasizes the manner of death. Matthew adds the earthquake. Luke replaces Son of God with innocent. But all 3 synoptic Gospels preserve the testimony of the centurion. John's Gospel does not name the centurion, but records in chapter 19, verse 34, that a soldier pierced Jesus' side with a spear after he had died, and that blood and water flowed out. Later, Christian tradition names the centurion as Longinus, though no first-century source confirms this. The name appears first in the apocryphal Gospel of Nicodemus, dated to the 4th century, and becomes standard in medieval hagiography. But the historical centurion, if he existed, left no signature, no inscription, no military record with his name attached to the execution detail that day. The Pilate stone, discovered at Caesarea Maritima in 1961, is the only archaeological artifact confirming the existence of Pontius Pilate as prefect of Judea. The inscription, carved into a limestone block reused in a later theater renovation, reads, "Pontius Pilatus, prefect of Judea, has dedicated to the people of Caesarea a temple in honor of Tiberius." The stone is now in the Israel Museum. It confirms that Pilate was a real administrator, that he held the title prefect, not procurator, as Tacitus and later Christian sources incorrectly called him, and that he engaged in the typical acts of imperial piety expected of a Roman official. But it tells us nothing about his judicial practices, his interactions with the Jewish leadership, or the executions carried out under his authority. The Gospels describe Pilate as reluctant to execute Jesus, yielding to pressure from the crowd and the temple authorities. Roman historians describe him as brutal, intolerant, and willing to provoke the Jewish population through actions that violated their religious sensibilities. Philo of Alexandria, writing in the mid-1st century, accuses Pilate of briberies, insults, robberies, outrages, wanton injustices, constantly repeated executions without trial, and ceaseless and supremely grievous cruelty. The centurion at the cross served under this man. His orders came from this prefect, and his observation, whatever it was made in the context of a regime that crucified routinely and without compunction. The mechanics of Roman crucifixion are documented in sources outside the Gospels. Josephus describes it. Seneca mentions it with disgust. Pliny the Elder refers to it in passing. The procedure was designed for maximum suffering and public humiliation. The condemned was scourged, beaten with a flagrum, a whip embedded with bone or metal fragments that tore the flesh. The horizontal beam of the cross, the patibulum, was then placed on the condemned's shoulders, and he was forced to carry it to the execution site. The vertical post, the stipes, was already installed at the location. The condemned was nailed or tied to the patibulum, which was then hoisted and affixed to the stipes. The position of the body, arms extended, weight hanging from the wrists or hands, made breathing difficult. Death came from asphyxiation, exhaustion, or shock, and could take hours or days. To hasten death, executioners would break the legs of the condemned, preventing them from pushing up to breathe. The body was left on the cross as a warning. Burial was typically denied. Carrion birds and animals were expected to dispose of the remains. The centurion was responsible for the execution detail. He commanded the soldiers who carried it out, ensured the sentence was completed, and verified the death. Roman military discipline was absolute. A centurion who failed to complete his orders faced punishment, including execution. The centurion at the cross was not a volunteer. He was not there out of curiosity or sympathy. He was there because it was his duty. He had likely overseen executions before. Crucifixion was common enough in the provinces that it would have been a routine part of his service record. But something about this execution was different. Different enough that he spoke. Different enough that his words were remembered. And different enough that 3 independent gospel writers preserved his testimony even though they could not agree on the exact words he used. The linguistic detail matters. The Gospels were written in Greek, but the centurion would have spoken Latin. His comment, whatever it was translated. Mark's version, "Truly, this man was the Son of God," uses the Greek phrase alethos houtos ho anthropos huios theo en. The phrase Son of God, in Latin, would have been Filius Dei, a term that in Roman religious vocabulary could refer to emperors, heroes, or figures of divine descent. A Roman centurion using the phrase would not necessarily have meant it in the theological sense Christians later understood. He might have meant it as a recognition of innocence, of nobility, of something extraordinary that defied easy categorization. Luke's version, "Certainly this man was innocent," translates the Greek ontos ho anthropos hautos dikaios en, which uses the word dikaios, meaning righteous or just. This version avoids the theological weight of Son of God and frames the centurion's observation in purely moral terms. The divergence suggests that the original statement, whatever it was ambiguous enough to support multiple interpretations. The centurion saw something. He said something. But what he meant by it is lost in translation. The suppression of the centurion's identity was not accidental. It was structural. Roman military records from the 1st century are fragmentary. Most have not survived. What remains are stone inscriptions commemorating veterans, discharge diplomas granting citizenship, and scattered papyri documenting pay, supplies, and troop movements. None of these sources name the soldiers who carried out executions in Judea during Pilate's administration. The anonymity was built into the system. Executioners were fungible. Their names did not matter. Their obedience did. The centurion at the cross performed his duty. He observed. He spoke. And then he disappeared from history, unnamed, unrecorded, reduced to a title and a function. The Christian tradition needed his testimony, but not his name. The Gospels preserve his words because they serve as external validation. A Roman soldier, a representative of imperial power, a man with no prior allegiance to Jesus, recognizing something that others missed. His testimony is powerful precisely because he is an outsider. If the Gospels had named him, if they had given him a backstory, if they had turned him into a character rather than a witness, the testimony would have lost its force. The anonymity makes him universal. Every centurion, every soldier, every representative of state violence forced to confront the innocence of the condemned. The absence of his name is theologically useful, but it is also historically frustrating. We know he existed. We know he spoke. We do not know who he was, where he came from, how long he served, or what happened to him after the execution. The later Christian tradition could not tolerate the silence. By the 4th century, the apocryphal Gospel of Nicodemus had given him a name, Longinus. The name derives from the Greek word lonche, meaning spear, a reference to the soldier who pierced Jesus' side in John's Gospel. The tradition conflated the centurion and the spear-bearer into a single figure and constructed a hagiography around him. According to the legend, Longinus was nearly blind. When he pierced Jesus' side, the blood and water that flowed out touched his eyes and healed him. He converted, left the Roman army, became a monk, and was eventually martyred for his faith. The story is pious fiction, constructed to give closure to the narrative gap the Gospels left open. But the fiction reveals the need. The centurion's testimony was too important to remain anonymous. He had to have a name. He had to have a story. He had to have a resolution. And so the church invented one. The military context makes the testimony more remarkable. Roman centurions were career soldiers, promoted from the ranks, hardened by years of service, loyal to the emperor and the legion. They were not philosophers. They were not theologians. They were enforcers of imperial order. A centurion stationed in Judea in the 1st century would have encountered Jewish messianic movements, apocalyptic preachers, nationalist rebels, and religious fanatics. He would have learned to distinguish genuine threats from harmless eccentrics. He would have developed a pragmatic cynicism about the claims of divinity made by provincial subjects, and he would have executed enough people to recognize the difference between defiance and resignation, between rage and peace. If the centurion said, "Truly this man was the Son of God," or "Certainly this man was innocent," he was not making a theological claim. He was making an observation. He had watched the condemned die. He had seen how they faced death. And something about this death was different. The gospel accounts provide the details that explain the difference. Jesus did not curse his executioners. He prayed for them. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." He did not plead for release. He accepted the sentence. He spoke to the criminal crucified beside him, promising him paradise. He entrusted his mother to the care of the disciple standing at the foot of the cross. He quoted Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And then, according to Luke, he said, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit," and died. The manner of death, the composure, the absence of rage, the continued concern for others, the prayer, was unusual. Unusual enough that a professional executioner noticed, and unusual enough that he said so. The earthquake mentioned in Matthew's account is not corroborated by other sources. Josephus, who documented natural disasters and portents extensively, does not mention an earthquake in Jerusalem during Passover in the year of Jesus' death. The darkness at noon, also mentioned in the Synoptic Gospels, is similarly uncorroborated. These details may be theological interpretation, cosmic signs marking the death of the Messiah, rather than historical events. But the centurion's testimony does not depend on miracles. It depends on observation. He saw a man die with dignity, with forgiveness, with trust. And that was enough to provoke a response. The question is what the centurion believed. Did he convert? Did he leave the army? Did he tell anyone else what he had seen? The Gospels do not say. The apocryphal traditions say he became a saint. The historical record says nothing. The silence is complete, but the testimony remains. And the testimony is not theological. It is experiential. The centurion did not say, "I believe this man is the Messiah." He said, "Truly, this man was the Son of God," or "Certainly, this man was innocent." The statement is observational, not confessional. It records what was seen, not what was believed. And in that restraint, the testimony carries weight. A Roman soldier, trained to kill, ordered to execute, standing at the foot of the cross, watching a man die, and recognizing that something here did not fit the script. Something here was different. Something here demanded acknowledgement. The institutional preservation of the testimony was selective. The Gospels preserved the words, but not the man. The Church preserved the tradition, but invented the name. The military preserved the structure, centurion, execution detail, provincial administration, but erased the individual. What remains is a voice without a body, a witness without an identity, a moment of recognition frozen in text, but detached from the life that surrounded it. The centurion spoke once. His words were recorded 3 times in 3 different versions by 3 different writers who did not agree on what he said, but agreed that he said something. And then he vanished. No grave, no inscription, no military diploma, no record of service, nothing but the testimony, preserved because it served a larger purpose, stripped of context because the context did not matter to those who preserved it. The fragment from Oxyrhynchus, if it refers to the same event, adds nothing definitive. It confirms that executions were routine, that centurions were present, that observations were sometimes recorded. But the damaged line, the lost continuation, the broken papyrus, these are the rule, not the exception. The historical record of the first century is fragmentary. Most of what happened was not written down. Most of what was written down has not survived. What remains are pieces, glimpses, voices that speak once and then fall silent. The centurion at the cross is one of those voices. He said what he saw. The Gospels preserved it. And the preservation, incomplete and contested as it is all we have.
It is done.
The final recorded words of the centurion, as given in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 15, verse 39, stand as the testimony of the unnamed witness. Truly, this man was the Son of God. The statement is observation. The meaning is contested. The speaker is anonymous, but the voice endures, carried across 2,000 years by writers who believed it mattered, preserved in texts that have been copied, translated, and read by billions. A fragment of recognition spoken by a man whose name we do not know, on a day we cannot date with certainty, at an execution that changed the shape of history. The centurion spoke. The words remain. And the silence that surrounds them is the silence of all the things we will never recover. The thoughts, the doubts, the moments of clarity that came and went without leaving a trace.